Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay and today my guest is Oscar David. Hi Oscar.
Hi.
And Oscar has written this book called The Enneagram For Managers, and he works in Holland and he works a lot with people in quite high places. So he works with government ministers, he works with the army and the police force and some big industrialists. And we're going to talk to you about how it is to work there and how actually those people at one level are interested in change and of course consciousness. So let's start with the obvious question. Why are these guys in high positions asking someone like yourself to come in and help them with consciousness?
Right. Sometimes I wonder too, but I think deep down we all want to learn more about ourselves, and especially people who work in places of power have to deal so much with themselves, with other people, and all the dynamics that's going on there, that usually there is a deep interest in knowing more about that on deeper levels.
So when you go in there, how do you start? Let's say it's chief of police or something, or a general in the army. How would you start in terms of the relationship?
Yeah, well, it really depends on the reason why I'm being invited. Sometimes I enter an organization as a troubleshooter. There is a real problem in terms of leadership, communication, conflicts between people, and they just want to have it resolved. And usually people understand that to resolve a situation like that, it requires self-reflection. So that's the starting point. And usually I explain them that if we want to resolve the situation, consciousness is needed, time is needed, not only our mind is needed, but also our heart and our feelings, and then we start.
But when you say your heart and feelings are needed to a high-powered general in the army, does that register?
Well, usually we start to talk about life in general as well. Okay. So we say, well, you know, when you have a difficult situation with your wife or your children, what's the key? What's the resolution? And usually they understand that they cannot resolve it by their minds only. So that's a good metaphor, and people recognize it. So then people see that to resolve problems in the workplace on a human level, actually it's the same as anywhere. Usually people start to become aware that the resolution is the obvious. It's being human in a heartful and intelligent way.
It's easy to say and it makes sense to me, but I'm still thinking you're making it sound a lot easier than it actually is.
Yeah, it's simple but not easy, usually.
Yes.
And one of the reasons that it's not easy is that people who work in places of power are under such an enormous pressure to perform that just reflecting and coming from a relaxed human place is not always easy, especially because those guys are almost always under attack or fighting wars. And this is a very instinctual activity. How do I survive the next crisis, the next attack, whether it comes from the outside or the press or your colleagues or wherever it comes from.
So a general in the army is not only possibly going to be fighting a war on the outside in Afghanistan or whatever, but what you're saying is he's got a war in his environment with maybe colleagues, and you mentioned the press. So this is pressure, isn't it? Because wherever he looks, he's having to defend himself, or he's going to have to go on the attack sometimes.
Exactly. And that's been my experience for almost all top positions. When you are in places of power, you have to deal with, you are in the war zone in a way, most of the time. So usually people can reflect and return to their hearts and their feelings quite easily when they have time to retreat. So when I work individually with them or in a retreat setting on a different site, so not on the workplace, usually they can, after some time, can relate to that. They can return to themselves. The challenge is always how to maintain that level of consciousness and awareness and connection when they are back in the workplace and the instinctual patterns are triggered so easily again.
So what is going on with you when you work with these people?
Well, first of all, I think it's an important spiritual practice for myself because I'm in the same space where they are, in a way. There is so much reactivity going on, and there is so much seduction going on, also for myself. I really need to stay in touch with myself. And the way usually I see it when I work with a client or a client system is that here's the client or the client system, and here I am, and here is true nature or being. And we're doing it with the three of us. So I see myself more as a guide and actually serving being or true nature in order that the client can reconnect with true nature, him or herself. And that's really a practice because it's, I think the Sufis said it, to be in the world but not of it. And also for me there is a strong pull to identify with the problems, the power structures, the fears, the greeds that are going on in that specific arena.
Okay, so I understand a bit more. So when you're with them, you're not really just trying to sort out and come up with ideas on a mental level. You are aware of a greater part of you, if you like. You mentioned true nature, consciousness. There's a source there, and that's kind of guiding you and supporting you in your work.
Exactly. So the only way I can do the work is when I'm well seated in myself and I'm as transparent and open for the guidance as possible, because that's in fact what they need. They are smart enough. So it's not really my brains that do the work. It's more that the space opens and the guidance is getting revealed so they can get in touch with their own resources again.
This is very different from what I understand as a normal management consultant or whatever coming to business, where they come in and they charge lots of money. I'm not saying you don't charge lots of money, I don't know about that, but they charge lots of money normally and they do great reports and they're coming up with clever ideas. And my experience of that is they've rarely connected with the people there and the culture of the company and what's really needed on a deeper level. It seems that you're coming from that place though, a deeper level.
Yeah, that's what I see as my job to do. And that also means that I enter the unknown field, because I also don't know where the resources are. So I have to find out where are the blockages and what's the potential, what's the real potential. And always the way I look is on 3 levels. First of all, the individual level. So what's the blockage of the leader, but also what's his potential and what's his gift and what's his destiny. But the same is true when it comes to the teams I work with. What's the potential of the team and where is the energy blocking? So usually that has a lot to do with group dynamics, but also the gifts of people working together. And then I've always to look at what's the potential of the organization in the society as large. Where is it blocking? Where are the gifts? So one of the tasks I see for myself as a consultant is to make the client aware of that. And sometimes it's by asking questions, and sometimes it's by just sharing my perspective, sharing what I see. And that initiates usually a good dialogue that hopefully opens the space.
I know from what you told me earlier, you also use constellations in business. Can you briefly explain what a constellation is and how it works?
Yeah. Yeah, the constellation is a wonderful way to visualize the power dynamics in the organization. So it's interesting when I work with managers and I ask them, do you have an image about how the power is being organized, how the power works in your organization? They know. For example, I work a lot these days in the health sector in academic hospitals. Usually in an academic hospital, the power is a very complex matter because there's all kind of what we call in business matrix structures. So you can be the head of your department, but when it comes to the medical education, one of the doctors who's working for you is in charge over there. So there is all kinds of different power positions. Usually if you ask them, how do you see who is in power in this situation or in that situation, they know it exactly. Because if they hadn't known, they couldn't survive in their position. And usually it is their guts, so they know it instinctually, but it's also in their heart, they feel it, and also in their minds, they strategize it.
So hang on, let's get this. So it's almost, it starts here,
Yeah,
then it goes here,
yeah,
then it ends up here.
yeah. Usually, people in top positions, all their centers are very well developed. They are not really aware of it because they are not really trained that way. But they can apply it for, for functioning in that kind of environment. When you use a constellation, you make that all more conscious actually. You make it visible.
It's like it's revealed.
It's revealed.
Yeah.
So what you ask, for example, like in this situation of an academic hospital, of course you always start with a question. Like someone might have the question, I want to change the culture in this hospital, the way we relate to each other. And then I say, well, what are the most important persons or powers when it comes to this issue of culture? And then, for example, the client might decide to put up the board of directors of the hospital. And we give them literally a place in the space, the same as what you do in family constellations.
You see, we have to assume our viewers know nothing about constellations.
Right.
So I would like you just to briefly explain how a constellation is set up.
Yes.
And how it works.
Yeah. So actually what you do is you choose the important persons or powers that are connected to the issue people have. So that can be, like in this example, it can be the board of directors. You choose 3 people for that. And this, of course, the way I talk now about it is when you do it in a group setting with a group of people.
Yes.
So let's say there are 20 people in the room.
Okay.
And I have my case, with the culture in the hospital. And then the group leader asks you, well, what are the important persons or powers? And you say, well, it's the board of directors. I think it's 3 people there. And then there is the head of this department and the head of some other department. And then we talk about it. And then the person realizes it's also the patients in our hospital,
Yeah.
etc. So maybe we end up with 6 important persons or powers. And then what you do is that the client is asked to choose someone to represent those persons or those powers.
So it doesn't have to be the actual person.
It's far more easy if it's not the actual person.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Does it have to look like the person or?
No. What I always tell them is just, just pick someone. Even like in family constellations, usually, for example, it's the obvious, they ask to have women representing women and men representing men. I find out in my work that even that is not so important.
Okay, so you pick, if we switch to the wide shot here, I should have got some more cups, never mind. So basically, you're picking, the client is picking 6 people to represent 6 different people in his company that represent 6 different power centers, if you like. And so they'll stand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. Do they stand in a particular shape?
Well, that's then the next task for the client, is to put them in a position that you feel like represents the actual situation. And this is interesting because especially in top management, people tend to rationalize. So this time they are really asked to put them in a position how they feel like they relate to each other. So sometimes the people can be put in a place that's far away from each other.
Yes.
Sometimes very close. So how do you experience the distance? So close, far away, but also which direction are they looking?
Okay.
They don't need to think about it. It's more like their gut feeling.
Yeah, good. So it's back here again.
Yes.
Yeah.
They don't need to talk about it. They can just do it in silence. They touch the other person and put that person in a certain position.
Yeah.
So when they've finished that, the person who are represented are being asked just to sense. What do they feel? What do they experience? Do they feel strong? Do they feel weak? Do they feel inspired? Do they feel flat? What's their experience like? How do they feel? How do they experience the other persons in the constellation?
We need to make it clear here, this is not the person that's doing that job in the company. This is a person just chosen to represent that person who probably doesn't even know that person.
Right.
But you ask them what they feel, and they're able to do it because somewhere their gut feeling is tuning in to the actual situation.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. And now usually it gets very interesting on several levels. One of the things that the people who are representing another person usually find out that they have all kinds of feelings they didn't have before they were in the constellation. You can feel very powerful. While when you are just sitting there in the workshop, you didn't feel so powerful. Or the reverse, you feel very powerful. And now you are in the constellation, you feel weak or powerless. So that's one thing that's interesting and revealing. And then what happens is that we make a kind of analysis, diagnosis. How does everyone feel in the position? But also what we do is that I always ask the audience, the other participants, what's your impression when you just see this image? Does the energy flow or not? Is it an harmonious situation? Is it conflictuous? How does it work? And it's very interesting that, again, usually top managers, they see it instantly. They have a very good sense for how the power works, when energy is blocked, when it flows. And
so they certainly have the intuition, the mental clarity to see it. But what is amazing me is they have the courage to reveal all this, be in this process and say it. Yeah.
Well, usually, of course, we can only do this in a very confidential environment. That's not always easy, especially when I work in the Netherlands. It's a little bit a village in terms of most people in top positions, they know each other. Even if they introduce the case anonymously, when you talk about people know you work for a certain organization, you talk about the board of directors, they are not so anonymous. So that requires some confidential environment, and if that's being established, it's very revealing for people, and it touches them because usually there are not so many places where you can talk about your feelings and concerns and vulnerabilities in terms of how you relate to other people in the organization.
Yeah, and this is groundbreaking in a way, isn't it? Because that's very normally in as I understand it in big organisations, as you were saying right at the beginning, it's a war zone, and you are protecting your position.
Yeah.
And here they are. Okay, it's a confidential environment, and you're obviously a very well trained and very respected facilitator, but they are still revealing quite amazing things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think one day I remember lately in a workshop, one of the participants said, "Well, now being here in this workshop, I don't need to read the newspaper anymore." This was in a governmental environment. So it's usually very touching how people trust each other and how open they are, and that's talking about their resources. Maybe apart from all the insights they get from the workshop, this is so supportive. When people feel they can connect with like-minded people in a confidential way, and there they can really recharge the batteries. They feel seen, they feel supported. Because that's one of the problems of being in a top management position, that usually it's very lonely.
Yes.
Of course it's good that there are consultants you can talk with and share your story with, like many top managers do. But it's even better if they can share with each other and have a supportive network there.
Yeah, so that's my next question really. They get back, they go on this course, whatever, 1 day, half a day, whatever it is. They go back to their working environment. They've come now a bit recharged and certainly with more insight and information. The next stage is to try and implement that on a practical level, and they're dealing with people that haven't necessarily been to this workshop, so the other people are possibly still in their same space as they were before. And I wonder how that is, how you encourage them to do that.
Well, it's really great if there is a management, a board in organizations that has a long-term vision on how they see human development in their organization. And there are some very courageous leaders that really state, also in the mission statement of the organization, that the only way they can really change the organization is when they, as leaders, embody the desired change. So if you desire more openness in your organization, more humanness, more a better way of communicating, a real serving way of leadership, the only way to do it is to embody it yourself. And in order to embody it yourself, it takes time, commitment over time, and it takes a commitment from everybody involved. In those situations, it's my experience that really change can happen. As you can see in those places that the top management is going to a retreat setting, workshop setting, in coaching situations over longer time. They not only communicate to the employees that it's important, the employees really see change. Because usually people just know how the top management not only is behaving, but also how they are doing with each other. And then it really affects people. And then when you require the same commitment of your employees, and they also do it, it's my experience that real change can happen over time.
Yeah, it's very encouraging, and I'm just looking back on the last few minutes, how you explained it, that in a way it started with you being grounded, as I think your words were, grounded in true nature. So you are coming from the wider picture of consciousness. Then that comes out, supported by the constellation. The managers there are affected by that on different levels. They're more confident in their gut and their heart, and thus their analysis of the situation. And that goes back when they go back to their work environment. They're taking part of that with them. So in a way, consciousness is growing in its own way in the work environment without anyone really knowing directly what's happening. And that's the beauty of it, isn't it?
That's the beauty.
Yeah.
Like I can just give you a very simple and basic example. Once I entered an organization I'd worked with for a long time, and I was waiting there. I had an appointment with the general manager. And all the people passing by were so open to me, saying hello, making contact. It's quite unusual in an organization that things like that, people are so open. And then I talked to the general manager and I said, this is really special. You know, I was waiting there for 10 minutes and I felt so well received. So there was so much nice contact with everyone, actually. How did you do it? How did you, make a culture like this? And the answer was, of course, the obvious. He said, I never instructed people to do so. I just do it myself.
Exactly.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
So do we get, this person was by nature at this openness.
Yeah.
So how do we get top management in a place that they really understand, they can really feel how important that is? How important it is to keep your humanness on all levels. And usually that's a matter of awareness and consciousness, because just teaching them to say hello is not so difficult. The skill itself is not the issue. It's just your focus, how you are in life. It's the same when, when we meditate or when we live our life. Can you stay in touch with your own experience? So this is really a part of training and commitment to make change on that level. And sometimes you see it's possible.
I know you also work with the Enneagram in business. You've had a lot of success with that. Can you explain again for people that don't know about the Enneagram, basically what it is, just 2 or 3 minutes on what the Enneagram is, and then we'll go on to how you actually use it practically.
Yeah, the Enneagram is a wonderful map of our personality, of the way our personality is wired, is focused on. And it shows in the way we feel, in the way we think, in the way we survive. And I think one of the wonderful aspects of the teaching of the Enneagram is that it not only mirrors our personality, it also shows us when we are beyond our identification with the personality, the greater potential of being and its qualities that can really show itself through us. So usually when I and my colleagues, when we teach the Enneagram, our starting point is the psychological dimension. It's just helping people to recognize their motives, their personality patterns. And what's so wonderful about it, first of all, is that people recognize it quite easily, the deeper drives. Am I driven more by fear, more by success, more by control, whatever it is. So it's a wonderful way for people to get to know themselves in a better way, to reflect on themselves, and also to understand their colleagues and other people from where they come from. So usually it opens up both a lot of understanding and a lot of compassion for the people you work with.
We should mention there's 9 basic types of the Enneagram. So any one person is going to be one of these basic types, or there's lots of overlaps.
Yes. Yeah, usually it turns out that people recognize all those 9 types. It's all basic human motivations. If we focus more deeply, we usually recognize there is one type, one motivation that is most present, that is the strongest. Makes sense from a psychological point of view that in order to survive, one strategy will do it. That's enough. So it's interesting that usually people can track it down to also the youth, how it all developed, and not only to their professional life, but also in personal life, in their relationship with your partner, your wife or husband. Usually it gets very clear.
And would you work, you were saying you were telling me that you actually work with the police force in some police chiefs in Amsterdam. Would you work with the Enneagram with people like that?
Yes. Actually,
It amazes me that they're open to something like that. It's not the image of the police force somehow,
right.
is it?
Well, what's so interesting, what I found in my work over all those years is everybody is interested in him or herself.
That's a good starting point.
That's the starting point.
Yeah.
Of course, you want to get to know yourself in a better way.
Yeah.
And every human being. So the Enneagram is a great approach. It's so helpful in getting to know yourself in a better way. And I think one of the things that's so nice about the Enneagram, it's non-judgmental. It's not one type is not better than another type. It's just human tendencies that helps to create more understanding. So yeah, I find usually actually all the people I work with, especially in top positions, they are very psychologically, they are very interested. So, I think my sense is they recognize the realness of the Enneagram and the potential. Because I think all of us, we know that there is more to life than our psychological framework we have. We come from a deeper source, from our true nature, and especially people in power, they are mostly unconsciously still connected with their true nature. Otherwise, you don't have the power to take all those decisions, to do all those kind of things you do.
Okay, this is very interesting what you're saying now. So what you're saying is that even somebody that's in a high position of power, they might be seen to us to be a complete idiot, although I'm sure you'd never say that about your clients, but they're seen generally to be, some people are complete idiots, making the wrong decisions or making difficult decisions, not making them well. And yet on the other hand, you're making the point that because they're in that position of power and they are making decisions, of which some will be right, of course, there is quite a connection with their true nature, with their consciousness.
Yes, and it goes with their position.
Okay.
Because when you are in a place of power, you are open to the universe. You are guided by the universe. Being needs leaders in order to manifest its potential. So people who are in a leadership position, the more they are open to the guidance of true nature, the more effective they are. And in some level they are, because they need to have great visions. They need to see what's not only the next step for the organization, but also what's the step in a decade? What's your vision about it? And the vision doesn't come from their mind, although usually they think it comes from their mind. If you really tune into them, it doesn't come from their mind. And then they say, well, I talk with them, and then they say, well, I agree, it comes from my gut feeling, or it comes from my heart. Well, maybe that's the way they experience it, but actually it comes through openness. It comes through their ability to be a guide of the greater vision. And that's really what people relate to. When they talk about we have a great leader here, in a way they mean a spiritual leader, a leader who is really in touch with and attuned with the potential unfolding of the organization. And the leader who can not only embody it but express it gets the authority. In that perspective, it's the same as in spiritual organizations. And especially nowadays, you see, maybe because of the fact that we are not so much into religion anymore, that you can also see that leaders in organizations, it's also a kind of spiritual leadership is also projected on them, for good or the worse, whatever. You know, partly it's of course a narcissistic tendency, but partly you can see that some leaders can really embody it.
But how would you reconcile that with people that, I'm going to say obviously evil leaders, obviously evil is always an interpretation, but I think generally in the West we would have people that we would say, the dictators, that some have been overthrown now in the Arab world, but there's other, like Assad in Syria, we would say that he is an evil leader. How does that reconcile with him being in touch with true nature?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, I don't know the person here in person, but it differs. The degree that a leader is really in touch with the greater unfolding and can serve that differs. And with ego power, you can hold power for a long time. I mean, usually it's not eternally, as we see in our history, but with what we call false strength, you can take the power, get the power. It's usually with a lot of ego force. And another thing that's important to realize, you can only keep your position if you get nurtured by your environment for that. So it's only as long as people give you the goodies you need, you can stay in power. Because the real way to stay in power is to be initiated by the greater force, not by the people who give you the goodies. So I think that's actually the path of leadership that is the potential for all leaders everywhere.
And we probably got that many years ago in terms of some of the great leaders, but it's kind of gone a bit in our short-term society, hasn't it? Where governments are elected for 4 or 5 years and they'll do everything they can to get re-elected, and CEOs of organisations and chiefs of government departments are usually there for a certain time, and then they have to perform during that time. They don't really look at the long-term view.
I think this is one of the problems in modern society, that both when it comes to governmental organizations in our Western democracies, and when it comes to our big corporations, which are usually so much dependent on the stock market, it gets very difficult for a leader to really run your organization inspired by God and not inspired by the outer world. And unfortunately, we pay a high price for that, I think. And it shows at the moment, I think, part of the crisis we are in as a society is that we don't know how to resolve our leadership problem, how to stay human, how to have human leadership in these kind of outer circumstances.
We did an interview a few months ago on Conscious TV with a guy called Richard Bartlett, who has written many books on business leadership. And he called one of his books The I Becomes We, and I called the program that. And I think of the I becomes we. It's like, yes, I'm the leader, and yet it's not essentially about me. It's about all of us. And that doesn't just mean my business, my company. It also means all of us, all humanity and the planet. And when you can adopt somewhere that attitude, the doors really start to open. It takes courage, and it is a completely different style of doing things. But it seems to me that's our only real future, is leaders that somewhere see that it's about we, not about I.
Yeah, I agree.
Is there people that you work with that you feel are beginning to see that in their own way?
Yeah, I see people taking steps, and especially in organizations where people can be in top positions for some longer time. There is this potential. Like, this is one of the advantages, for example, of family-owned businesses, or businesses where the people who are in charge can stay in leadership positions for a longer time. And also in like the Dutch governmental system, the top civil servants don't change when there is a new government. So that has also all kind of disadvantages and risks, but usually what you really need is a long-term vision and a long-term plan for leadership development. That's very helpful.
How does doing all this work with quite powerful people impact your own journey inside?
Well, as I said, for me, it's a spiritual practice myself, is to stay with myself and to stay with true nature while being in those reactive environments. It's always a practice of remembering myself when I'm with them while staying open and having my heart connected. So that's a practice. And I think a part of that, my own spiritual practice, is very important. I wouldn't know how to do it without, because all the places where there is so much ego entanglements, I get entangled so easily myself. So I have to return to my own practice on a daily basis.
So when you go in to do these meetings with these guys and they've got their trips going on with each other, that in a way you're saying is like a meditation for you to stay in touch with who you really are.
That's the only way I can serve them.
Yeah.
So to be in this free place, being open for their own entanglements, contractions, while at the same time staying connected with the bigger picture and seeing the potential of openness and love and empowerment and strength in a real way to be revealed there.
It must be actually very rewarding. You're sitting there and you're coming from this place and seeing that actually there's not always resistance, there is openings. And when you see an opening in somebody or a situation, I guess it's a doorway which then you feel permission to enter and look around and see what can happen next.
Exactly. And can you imagine that you are in a group, board of directors, a team, where these openings take place, where there is a kind of revelation of truth and openness and realness, the effect on the team, when that happens just with one person. So usually it ignites a whole different field, a field of openness and strength and inspiration. And that's really empowering for the team and usually for the whole organization. And as you said, also, of course, for myself, that's one of the most rewarding moments in my work when that happens.
Have you got any particularly interesting stories? It can be nameless organizations where big breakthroughs have happened that will interest people.
Yeah, well, I think I've in all kinds of variations, I've seen that in most of my client systems, the moments of truth. Sometimes it is that people are revealing both their real feelings about, vulnerability, pain or suffering they experience in the work situation, or when they feel free to expose their real hopes, their real visions, the real passion where they come from. So it's both. And if people share that with each other, it's wonderful. And I can just give you one example that it was lately in also a healthcare organization, where people shared, the board of the organization, they shared their biography, how they grew up, etc. And then I asked them, not only share your biography, also when you listen to the story, I invited the other board members, do you see somewhere the passion for this work, the passion for working in the health sector? And it was so touching. And it became clear that it was not for nothing that people worked there. Because there was a link with their own health, or what happened with their family, or other kind of stories that had deeply touched their heart. And that was why this was their mission. And can you imagine, after sharing that with the group, there was so much love and so much tenderness and such a deep appreciation for themselves and their colleagues. And then they knew, this is why we are doing the work. This is very powerful.
But when you use words like love and tenderness in a high-power business situation, it's quite difficult to take that on board somehow. Because, it's great you say it, and I'm sure that happen, but
Yeah.
isn't that rare?
Well, you imagine, this is of course not what I start with,
Yeah.
but when it's there, when it's true,
When it's there,
when
it's
everybody
there,
feels
yeah.
there is love,
Yeah.
I mean, we can't deny it. You can
Yeah.
just mention it, because that's what there is.
Yeah.
And everyone recognizes it. And of course is grateful about it, because after all, I mean, we all love to make a contribution in our work to the world. And if we can not only reconnect for ourselves, but also share that with our colleagues, we usually fight. It's so wonderful.
Yeah.
It's so touching.
Yeah. It reminds me of something I should talk about briefly, which I've never mentioned on Conscious TV before, but one of the inspirations of Conscious TV came out of a workshop I did with my wife Renata about 5 years or so ago, maybe a little bit longer. And we're both in this school, the Ridwan School, which I know you're in as well, the
Yes.
Diamond Heart work, and we've been in that school for many, many years now. And there was one retreat, 4-day retreat in Germany, in I think it was at Easter time. And we have about 60 people in our group. And we'd known these people for a long time and done exercise with them and talked with them and whatever else, and hung out with them and maybe been away for weekends with them. We just knew some of them really well. And all this workshop was, everybody in that group shared the story of their life in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And actually 15 minutes is not long to share the story of your life, especially if you're like me in your 60s, you know, it's kind of, you think, 50, God, let's cover that. And it's obvious, so you start to distill down what were the really important things.
Yes.
And it was such a touching exercise. And that's all we did, all for 4 days, and sit round in a circle and we listened to people's stories.
Yeah.
And it was just extraordinary what I heard. And a lot, because the group is based in Germany, there's lots of Germans there and Dutch people like yourself. And their probably average age is around 60. And so there's a lot of stories to do with the war, with the parents in the war, and there's Jews in the group, and there's Germans in the group, that, you know, who maybe their parents weren't maybe up to any good in the war, shall we say, and Jews who are having a very difficult time. And this all comes out.
Yeah.
Without judgment, this is the way it was.
Yeah.
And there's one woman I know a Dutch woman, and she was hidden in a cupboard for 3 years because she was Jewish. What came out was just extraordinary. And I was so touched by that. I thought, this kind of thing needs to get on television.
Yeah.
And that was one of the major inspirations of Conscious TV. And that's why, in fact, ironically, we haven't done it so much with you today, but that's why we often do focus partly on the biography of the person in the interview, because of the depth that can bring.
Yes.
So I understand exactly how you can do that.
Yeah.
If you can encourage people to really share their biography from a depth that they're able to do it, that's extraordinarily powerful.
Yeah. I
We're
agree.
lost for words, eh?
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful to hear your story.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just looking at my notes here, which so often happens. I spend all these hours making the notes and then I hardly refer to them. I don't think we'll go into your story. Somehow that doesn't need to happen. And I wrote down things like, people realise, a quote from you, deeper wisdom is needed. How to change an organisation, and you've talked about that. The one thing I was going to also bring up briefly was, we discussed this at dinner last night, that there is a new breed of organisations which are growing very, very, very fast in a very different way from the more traditional established organisations. And if you take organisations like Apple and Google and Facebook, they're all very famous. And if you look at the stories of how those organisations grew, especially the early days, there was this tremendous excitement about innovation, tremendous focus. And I really like particularly the Google story in the early days about how they had the restaurant there with the top vegetarian cook, and anyone that works there, free food, free breakfast, free lunch, free dinner. So it's an encouragement. Okay, it gets people to work longer hours, that's true. On the other hand, there's encouragement to really feel that working is an enjoyable part of life.
Yeah.
And also creative staff there are encouraged to work 1 day a week on their own private projects to see what came out of that in terms of creativity, no boundaries, no instructions. And I'm wondering if that becomes more of the new way of a business as they all grow and get bigger. Hopefully they can keep part of this intensity, innovation, excitement, drive, focus, because by doing that, they forget more and more the individual self, and it becomes more we are a we moving forward to see where we can take the evolution of what the idea is, what the organisation is. And I think for me that's very exciting times.
Yeah, it is very exciting. And I think this is the potential of modern times, partly because of new technologies, that we can work much more in a kind of network kind of way with each other. Usually the startup organizations are in a good place. You know, it's like, because it is just creativity, entrepreneurship. And so the challenge is always how to deal with bureaucracy when it comes in. And that's always related to growth. So I think there have been all kinds of experiments, you know, to keep the creativity flowing in those kinds of organizations. I think Apple and Google are great examples for that. But it's very challenging, especially when you get bigger. And there is, as I said, there's more bureaucracy. So, but I think that's a challenge for leadership, how to keep the flow going.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of Steve Jobs. I'm working my way through his biography, and there you have somebody that built something extraordinary. There's no secret now, the book's out, that he was a very difficult man at times, and often it seems a very cruel man at times. On the other hand, he was a Zen meditator, and there was just tremendous creativity, tremendous passion to create something new and beautiful. And it seems that all these forces are together. And I guess if you'd ever had the chance to work at Apple with Steve Jobs' top team, that would have been absolutely fascinating. Yeah. And maybe somebody was doing that. I don't know. I haven't finished the book yet, so maybe that's in there somewhere. So we have to finish in about 2 or 3 minutes. Do you have some parting words to Conscious TV viewers about your work briefly?
Well, I think it's wonderful that you bring all this work to the world, and I think I feel very connected to actually everyone in this world who brings consciousness to life, to the workplace, to just the environment where you live. I think in a way that's the real work. Can we embody it? And in my professional work, it's in a very specific way. But I think for all of us, it's like how do we embody spirit in life, while living our life, whatever our destiny is, whatever our work is. So I think Conscious TV and lots of efforts there are these days is an incredible support for supporting and connecting all the like-minded souls who really wish not only to embody the greater potential for themselves, but to live it in the world and to do that as an act of service.
Wonderful. Okay, Oscar, thanks very much for coming over from Holland to do the interview. Appreciate that. Good luck with your work. And thank you very much for sharing at a deep level what you do.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for watching Conscious TV. And to remind you again, the Enneagram for Managers book, Oscar's book. And if you do work in business and you want to know more about the Enneagram, how it can be effective in business, how you can learn more about it, this is probably a great starting point as a book. Thank you again for watching us, and I hope we see you all again soon. Goodbye.